Well, we are back, Jim and Amanda here at the MacArthur Memorial, and it's time for some question and answers about MacArthur's relief by President Truman. So we will just get right into the questions. So, Jim, question number one. What effect did relieving MacArthur of duty have on Truman's political career? Do you think it played a role in his brief 1952 reelection campaign?
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't even run, does he? In
He
52?
sort of. I mean, there's a primary challenger, and I think he loses like the New Hampshire primary
Mm,
to someone else.
yeah.
So,
No, I
but no,
mean,
he's out quickly.
it was detrimental to both of them, I think, the whole flare up and whatnot. But
Yeah.
yeah, I, I didn't realize that he had tried to do that.
I think maybe I'm wrong on that, but I think he did
Okay.
briefly, but I
Yeah,
don't think he's in very long.
right.
But I think he also has like an approval rating of 29%. So
Right.
so it hurts him, but I think it's also been my impression is that firing MacArthur certainly didn't help. I think it splits up a lot of moderate Democrats and Southern
Mm,
Democrats from supporting him.
okay.
But I think more than that, it's kind of the stalemate in Korea. People are
Right,
tired of
right.
war, but we've won World War II and we've won it well.
Yeah.
And then this war goes into stalemate, and I think people are just like, what is going on
Well, when
here?
does when does Ike get into it?
53
Well, I
or
mean, no,
52?
because he
52.
he wins the election, but
Yeah.
I'm wondering, like, once Ike declares, I mean, I think that's at the convention that they figured that out that he'll get the vote.
Right.
But I wonder, because once Ike declares, I think the writing's on the wall.
Right.
That
Yeah.
Truman's probably like, you got every GI from World War II's
I'm gonna vote
gonna
for
vote
him.
for Ike,
Mhm.
so I mean, that's probably got
Yeah.
I don't know when the time frame
Yeah.
is, but it seems like that would probably weigh on Truman more than the MacArthur thing.
And then it makes you think back of when, MacArthur's telling him, look, it's not going to be me running against you. It's going
Yeah,
to be Ike.
yeah, yeah,
So, but no, I don't think that, I think it was probably a confluence of a number of events, and it's a perfect
yeah,
storm
yeah,
for him
yeah,
in the end. So, but I think MacArthur's firing is just one factor in all of that.
yeah, yeah.
But I have to read up more on that timeline. All right, second question. What was the relationship between Truman and MacArthur like in later years? What positive things did Truman say about MacArthur?
I don't think he ever said anything positive about him later on. I mean, they get in the big fight in '54 that goes into Life magazine, and then Truman, says in '60 that MacArthur wanted to use nuclear weapons, and MacArthur calls him on that one. And then even after MacArthur's gone, he keeps going back to it. And I think like there's one of those books that talks about, his advisors are just like, would you just let it go
Hmm.
already?
Yeah.
I mean, he does send that telegram to MacArthur on his deathbed, really.
Hmm.
But he
Which is nice.
yeah, but I mean, I don't, I, I think that he couldn't get over it as much as MacArthur was able to get over it. You
Hmm.
know, I think MacArthur blamed other people more than Truman,
I think he
for
just
being
thought Truman
fired.
had some guts
Yeah.
to do it, to
Well,
fire
he
him.
said that later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think Truman is asked at one point, was MacArthur the right person for this job? And he makes it very clear, he was talented, he was the right, I chose the right person in
Right. Yeah.
1950 for the Korean War.
Yeah. I mean, there's talk that Leif Sverdrup, who's the guy who runs the Sverdrup Engineering, he'd been MacArthur's engineer, and he was from Missouri, and he knew Truman. And
Mhm.
Larry Bunker, who was MacArthur's aide, they tried to get some kind of meeting with them later on, like a rapprochement type thing,
Mhm.
and never came to fruition.
Yeah,
Neither of them were going to do that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So they weren't close and admiring each other from afar. There was still some hard feelings, but
Oh
MacArthur
yeah,
had kind of moved on.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. All right, next question. When did the myth of MacArthur requesting to use nuclear weapons against China first appear?
That I'm not sure. I wonder, because I can't remember if Revere and Schlesinger are the first ones that come out with the big book, The General and the President,
Hmm.
about the conflicts. But even if MacArthur, the talk and whatnot, would that have still been classified to even talk about that? You know, so I'm not real sure. I mean, we know, of course, because of the, after he dies, there's all the
Hmm.
the talk of him using nuclear weapons. But they had, I think that a lot of people were talking about it at the time.
Yeah.
I don't know, because I mean we have all the newspapers, but it doesn't, there's not really any kind of stories in there about that. And I think it's really, after he dies that people, see that, where he said, I would have dropped, 30 to
Yeah.
50
Him
atomic
thinking
bombs.
back
Yeah.
years later saying, maybe we shouldn't have
Yeah,
done this. What
yeah,
ifs?
yeah.
Yeah.
Those interviews
But,
with Jim Lucas
mm,
and Bob Considine.
right.
You know,
I mean, but Truman mentions it in his interview with that Chicago TV station, though. Like, this
yeah,
is one of the reasons I
yeah. And
fired him.
that's probably the first
Yeah.
time that, but
And then he retracts
yeah,
that.
because MacArthur says, "Show me where I
Yeah.
ever said that," and then Truman says, "Well, I just thought he wanted to do that."
Next question. Um, what was Truman's plan to end the Korean War when MacArthur communicated with China in March of 1951?
Well, I think he was wanting to get the Chinese to the table, to start talking,
Mm-hmm.
um, and pretty much go back to a status quo antebellum. When MacArthur sabotages that, he says later in that VFW speech he gives in Miami after he comes home, I think it's like in the summer of 1951, and he said that in that speech that he sabotaged it because they were going to offer the Chinese a table at the United Nations or a seat
Mm-hmm.
at the United Nations. And, that was like rewarding them for an undeclared war,
Okay.
and he would always call them a rogue nation, you know, and so that's why he does it. What's Truman's plan? I think he just wants to end it as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was, at that
Ended
point,
it,
we got to get out of here. Whereas Mao's just going to wait him out, until Stalin tells him to stop.
end it by armistice or end it
But by armistice,
just
yeah,
armistice.
yeah, coming to we're going to have a truce
Mm-hmm.
or whatnot. Yeah.
Right, next
And that's
question.
what, got him going because MacArthur kept having plans to win it,
Right.
you know.
Next question. Um, is there any credibility to the story of MacArthur talking to foreign ambassadors in Tokyo about how he would convince Truman to bomb China?
Well, MacArthur denies it, and we talked about in the broadcast that we did about the Spanish and the Portuguese, and what they're saying back. And MacArthur said, it's like I said, he said this is so beyond anything that's real, which it is. A great deal of it was just, not true. What they were saying in those messages that were going back and forth. And I've looked at it to see if MacArthur met the Spanish ambassador. I think it was Ojeda or something like that at that time, and it didn't jive, with it at that point. But I mean, I don't. We know what we know because of what we have on paper. I mean,
Right.
so I mean, to say, did he meet those people at some other point? I don't know.
Hmm.
You know,
Okay. Next question, and I may mispronounce this. Tell us the story of the USS John A. Bull. Did I say that right?
well, that's a story that's come out recently, and well, I guess in the past couple of years, and it's a story of a Navy ship. This guy's done all his work. He sent it to us actually. I just, I haven't cataloged and gone through it all yet. But it's the story of this ship that supposedly MacArthur sent um, in to try and get the Chinese to attack the ship in, the Formosa Straits, kind
Mhm.
of. But does MacArthur have the capability or the command structure to tells certain ships where to go. I think that's the Navy, that
Mm,
does that. But like I said, I haven't read all this guy's thesis and everything yet.
mm.
But he did send it to us, and so eventually we'll go through it. But that's about all I know.